with respect to budget, and also with respect to the kind of last 2 days of activity. So I'm just putting, so this call is on recording now. So welcome once again, gentlemen. So today we are definitely going to have a perspective, a clear perspective, an expert perspective, as well as an entrepreneurial perspective on the union budget, which was announced yesterday by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. And I'm sure that the kind of time which we all are undergoing, this budget means a lot, especially from the perspective of coming back to the economic growth track, and also from the perspective of focusing on certain long-term visions, certain long-term plannings of economic recovery and growth. So to discuss this important development which happened yesterday, we have Mr. S. Ravi, who is the managing director of Ravi Rajan company, as well as he's one of the finest finance expert of the country. He led Bombay Stock Exchange as the chairman of that institution, and I'm definitely looking forward to hear from him, because he's also one of the important professional who understands the budget and who understands the nitty-gritties of this. And also we have Mr. Himanshu Patel, who is a young dynamic entrepreneur and an innovative mind, as well as a person who is actually having a firm belief on India. Being based out of US, he has always been focusing on working in the in his land of origin, which is India, and he's been working dynamically on on the EV sector. And definitely his project is all about creating more jobs in India, creating more opportunities for MSMEs. And we are definitely going to understand the impact of this year's budget from his perspective as well. So thank you so much, Himanshu, for joining. Uh, so gentlemen, as we are just setting the context here, I would like to throw upon yesterday's certain MSME specific pointers that we collected, and we have been getting a lot of responses, also the feedback also from the industry. So from the perspective of MSMEs, announcement of the ECLG scheme as an extension as well as expansion of ECLG, that is something is getting considered as a very positive impact full initiative. Then from the perspective of ease of doing business and accessing information, that is a long pending thing which yesterday Ms. Sitaraman have announced from her speech, which was the convergence of multiple portals, which is related to labor, the ASEEM portal, NCS, and the Udyam portal per se. So with this convergence, I hope, and that's what the kind of feedback we are getting, that the ease of doing business, that the target of that can be achieved. I'm definitely going to hear from Himanshu on his vision of ease of doing business, because he will bring very because of his global expansion, global footprint. He can probably give us an insightful on how this ease of doing business mean for him. Definitely the 50,000 crore and the 5 lakh crore ECLG expansion is something very big. Then the 2 lakh crore additional credit under CGT MSE, that the announcement is also been made. And and then the additional 6,000 crore on the ramp program. So these are few MSME specific with our analysis, we found these things. Apart from the focus on Gati Shakti, the focus on building the logistics and the infrastructure, which will eventually help. So, sir, if I may start with you, from your opinion on on this budget, what exactly are the uh, top game changers or top drivers of this budget, according to you?
So my first view, I'm just going off for SME for a minute. My first big thing announcement is the digital currency and taxation on cryptocurrency. I'm clearly distinguishing between cryptocurrency and digital currency. And also anything that is a transfer or a gift will also be taxed at the receiver's end. And any transfer, there will be a TDS of 1%. So this is a game changer because there was a lot of haze around this whole thing. What is it going to happen? What is the class of asset, etc., etc. So the digital currency and cryptocurrency are two different aspects, and that is, in my view, a very, very big change. In my view, the second thing which I feel is very important is the digitalization of, or digital world of, the villages also. Putting down the fiber optics and making digital villages digital, because it will create jobs and it will also create SMEs. So, and coupled with the Gati Shakti, what will happen as we go across and build roads, transportation, even airports, what will happen is SMEs also will start coming into play, because all this I will give a very classic example of Trichy. It got developed because of BHL. How many subsidiaries and SMEs came into Trichy? So just because of that. So similarly, what will happen? A lot of growth in the SME segment will come because of the Gati Shakti. So in my view, these are three very good things. Fourth, they have held on to agriculture, which was the only sector, or which is one of the other sectors, which in the pandemic stood tall by giving a higher percentage, contributing higher percentage to the economy. So the focus has been on these four aspects. Apart from, there are many other aspects, but this are, in my view, the four biggest things that have happened. And of course, last but not the least, EV and the solar sector.
Yes, yes.
PLI for the solar sector.
Yes.
So that is, and last, one more point that I want to say, the global order is changing with climate change, ESG. And so this budget is putting a capex to expand into those areas, which is a great step for the future.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Himanshu, from your perspective of EV, as well as the ease of doing business, because you have been actively working on introducing some of the large job generation kind of projects. How do you look at these announcements which have been made yesterday from the speech?
I mean, thank you first for having me first, foremost. In my opinion, I think the EV was not as strong as I predicted, right? I think they took the EV and they started talking about swapping the batteries. That division, there's more budgets in that side of the world. In my opinion, I think the budget should have went a little more further into the EV infrastructure, which is the charging stations. I still feel that India needs that infrastructure and needed to concentrate on their budget on that component, which we don't see on the budget list right now, that the infrastructure of the charging station should have been more heavily concentrated, more than the swapping of the battery concentration, right? And that's my opinion again. That portion of it was really diversifiedly done and poorly done, in my opinion. I think they really need to relook at that component, and they need to figure out how on the next budget, or figure out how they're gonna help the EV companies to come in, because without the EV infrastructure, doesn't matter if we set up like 10,000 EV companies, but if the EV infrastructure is not there for charging, then there's really not much to go off of, right? So I think, in my opinion, if you have the EV infrastructure, anybody can build the EV cars, and there'll be more guys to come in. Look at the success of US, some of the players. Their success has come from having the EV infrastructure in place, right? And in my opinion, that's the part that I see that hasn't. We didn't see a good lead on from as far as the budgetary goes. But also on the positive side, they're willing to be very open-minded, right? And they're looking at the swapping battery side, right? Which again, as a manufacturer, we're going to say, we don't know how much that's really going to work in the EV car industry side, but it's a great idea that it will work on the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers. But then when you talk about cars, buses, and trucks, we don't see it being as strong as it would be for the two-wheelers, the three-wheelers, as those batteries are much smaller and easier to swap. When you talk about buses that have, 200 kilowatt battery that weighs somewhere nearly about 3,000 pounds, it's going to be very difficult for you to swap that battery on a regular basis. And you're not just talking about one bus, you're talking about multiple buses on a day, right? So I think that's the part, right? I think also the part of the budget that I saw, the infrastructure strength that the Nirmala Sitharaman has tried with the cryptocurrency, I think it's a great footstep forward, right? Open-minding the thinking of crypto, and allowing people to be able to at least make it a little bit of a legitimacy of, okay, guys, yes, we have a footpath. That's a starting point, in my opinion, right? And as we are working very closely on the U.S. side with our Congressman Pete Sessions, I think there's a lot that India and U.S. can do together, in my opinion, on the crypto side.
I was just coming on to that point as well. You have got a very contemporary, understanding and contemporary observation on the US market, where crypto has been on a couple of level mature than India. I'm sure your observation on the Indian focus of crypto, which is just got visible yesterday. So how do you looking at bringing the two, like the expertise of a certain matured market to a country which is relatively much new to crypto? Are you looking at bringing the two closer?
Because I was yesterday appointed by the congressman to help him and advise him on the relationship building between the two countries, U.S. and India, based on crypto. Pete Sessions is rightfully, doing quite a bit of policy makings in the U.S. So very similarly, we would like to try to see if we can probably even help and guide, India on that footpath, right? To let them understand how the policies are working in other countries and how it can work in India, and how we can cooperatively, address the crypto issues globally, not just on a country level. In order for that to happen, you need global leaders to step up, and global leaders to understand each other and be on the same side. I think, in my opinion, the world has changed after the pandemic, Fez. People are willing to now join forces. You ask me, 4 years back, for India and US to join, not only for India and US, but any country to join forces on something, it was like a challenge itself, right? One guy had wanted one thing and the other guy wanted another thing. And now it's like, okay, guys, that's not about what I want and what you want. It's like, okay, what's the right thing, right? And you're starting to see that happen globally, right? And we do see quite a bit of up changes, right? I noticed recently the taxes have come down on some of the stuff, restaurant taxes came down, for as far as India goes. The taxes on a lot of things have come down after this budget, which is great, because honestly, that was needed, right? It was needed to give the boost for the people of India, and also the tourists that are coming in. It will imply that, look, we're more welcoming, right? I think these 4 or 5 segments, if India just keeps focusing, India is going to come very far ahead. And I do see India becoming the, this is again my vision of understanding, is that India wants to and it will become the hub of the EV supply for the global
It
market.
should be. It should be. That's how, things are shaping up, and we also hope that. Mr. Ravi, if you can give us a bit, of your further observation on this budget for the manufacturers, especially, from the perspective of, you know, ensuring more ease of doing business for the manufacturing segment, as well as uh, the kind of, incentive programs that the Gati and, other schemes might have, announced. How do you look at this budget from the manufacturing segment?
So, first of all, the PLI, which is a very
Yes.
globally recognized, well accepted initiative that the government took in the previous year, or the 2 years ago, has been widened to include solar also. And so that really will help the country, because as I mentioned, we are moving from a conventional energy to a non-conventional energy. Similarly, we are moving from normal vehicles to EVs. So this PLI is going to be really helpful for uh, a sort of import substitution to a great extent. That is my first view. The second view for the manufacturer is the process of e-billing, which is going to happen. Of course, GST is live, but e-billing and e-processing across a platform is going to be a very, very big step, because what will happen is bills will get processed, the payment cycle will be faster, so and ease of doing business will be quicker. This is a big announcement, but implementation, we will have to see this implementation closely, because
Yes, that's where the
own time frame.
hmm,
It is a good vision, and I think we will have to look at how it gets implemented.
exactly.
It may get implemented in stages, or it will start with Navratnas. I do not know how they will start, but I think there will be a mechanism to it also. The third point is I also would like to reiterate that the Atmanirbhar program continues in many ways, and wherein for SMEs there is a priority of getting payment, MSMEs and SMEs over others. From all the public sector companies, at least they have given a special dispensation to see that their bills are cleared faster and put on priority than the others. So that is there. Then the Gati Shakti, which we just talked about, it is a big program, and
It is.
along with the capex, it is going to be the fulcrum of our economy. So, so everybody looks at this budget as just this year. It is not about this year. It is laying foundation for the next generation.
Exactly.
And world order, as I said earlier, is changing. So what happens is, with that change, we are putting some footprints here, deep footprints here. So my view is that all this is going to help the SMEs. It will help EV, it will help solar, and it will help the manufacturing. And ease of doing business, if you look at what 5 years ago ease of doing business, and today you see the ease of doing business, there is a far faster way of sort of disposal of things, faster clearances, has to improve. It's not that we are in a very perfect world, but it has to improve. But all this with GST being very, very just settling down, all these things, only thing is little bit of taxation on the GST side, so that the working capital cycle becomes bigger. That is one thing that has been the industry demand. But I think we are on the right track as far as manufacturing is concerned.
Okay, so yeah, so there are certain positive long-term positive things, as well as that is the manufacturing part. Himanshu, as a manufacturer, how do you look at although it is not the time to talk about what are your key expectations, because we have already did that in earlier, activities of ours, pre-budget activities. But from your perspective as a manufacturer or as an entrepreneur with creating jobs for MSMEs as well as for the skilled manpower, how do you look at your wish list and this budget, and what are the things that you still hope that can probably could have been added more value, or what are the key points that you think that are good in this budget, which will definitely going to motivate you as an entrepreneur?
So first, thank you. India has, like Mr. Ravi said, India has been very different from, I can even say 6 years from now back. It was a very big challenge for a foreign company to come in and set up their shop there, and even for the local, right? Things have changed. We do see them. And it's just a matter of time that it just needs to keep improving, right? And it is improving, and it's taking a cycle. But at some point, we need to kind of fast track that to be even more faster. I see the digitalization has already really been helping on that side of it, digitalizing a lot of the stuff. I think the part that we're going to start seeing, the only areas I would say is a concernable area, Fez, is the side where ease of banking for a foreign company, right? That hasn't still changed, but it has changed in a better performance-wise. I remember if you transferred money from US 6 years ago, it would have probably taken you 30 days to get all the approvals, all the paperwork, a lot of the stuff that US banks didn't know that what the requirements were from the perspective of India. Now things that they have turned quite a bit of that into digital formation of the requirements, and RBI is able to, when we as a foreigner sitting in American banks, it asks us the right questions and we're able to answer the questions. And when that comes over to the Indian perspective, by the time it gets there, it's only like a matter of a couple of days and it's clear. Where if you looked at it 8 years or 7 years ago, it would take you 2-3 weeks before the money clears. So yes, the digitalized transformation has helped in that format, and we do see that ongoing. It will continuously help us on moving forward, and also this cryptocurrency will make that also easier, right? So of course, the ease of doing business from a foreign perspective, we do see that coming, and I'm glad, like I said earlier, the cryptocurrency part, because that's also going to create a little bit of ease on how to do business in India and dealing with the capital part of it. And I think that's the whole why the global world is headed in crypto, right? Is because it's easy to move capital around and still be able to trace it where it's coming from, right? So I think, in my opinion, the government has the right foot path forward. So does, I've seen a lot of aggressive movements from Amitabh Kant's office, which is Niti Aayog, very helpful to foreign companies as well as local companies, and they're very aggressive, right? And that aggressive is actually driving the motivations to guys like us who are coming from the foreign part of the world to move and do things with foreign entities or foreign growth. Even from the SME side, we're now looking at it and willing to help because we've been driven that way from Niti Aayog's office and other offices. And of course, Fez, we always see you about MSME, and we love the fact that you always drive about MSME. And we need more people like this that drive and talk about small, medium businesses, enterprises, right? And if we continue to see that drive, this is where the transformation of ease of doing business also happens for us, right? Because we get a guidance, right? Or else what happens is we stay on the high level and we never come down to the needy and deedy part, right? And this is where I think India really has put a play of kind of guide. Even the budgets I've seen and I've been reading about is all about guiding how to allow larger entities to address the SMEs and also even think about SMEs, because they
Exactly.
drove the budgets around SME, which is now helping to make sure that we can deal with that. And so kind of, I agree that, at ease of doing business has been now much easier due to the fact of this new budgetaries as well.
So thank you. We have some questions coming in through our channel. So one of them is interesting, which we might have missed. Sir, Ravi sir, if I can get your attention on the fund of funds, because there is a question which we have got from WhatsApp from one of our reader. He says the fund of funds announcement, how do you look at that particular thing? Is it like it should have been more more aggressive this year, like it was been announced last year, it would have been added? Or how do you look at the MSME credit, or the banking flow to the MSMEs through this budget? How do you look at this aspect?
So the first question, fund of funds. So of course, see, any equity that comes in, it takes time. See, you go to a private equity today, how much time does it take? So basically, the biggest challenge which the government felt for the SMEs and MSMEs was the equity and the capital raise. And especially in the second level of capital raise. First level of capital raise, everybody puts their money. But when the cash burn happens, the second level of equity raise becomes very difficult. And that too, you're coming after a pandemic, after a closure, becomes further difficult. So I think it's a great step. Only think it needs to be accelerated.
Yes.
And I think ownership of that has to come more aggressively. It has happened, but I think it needs to be propelled. That's what my personal thing is. Second, coming to banking. So bankers are working within the boundaries or the framework. So there is no out-of-box thinking on this. Government has announced the scheme, very fine, but beyond that, they have not gone and done something very aggressive, because the Indian banking, I just heard Himanshu also about it. Actually, Indian banking is not being the aggressive sorts because of its own constraints and the challenges that they have of accountability, etc. And I think that's one thing, if it is addressed. We need not be indiscreet about it. We should be discreet about lending. But the fact is, genuine lending has to be protected. Genuine entrepreneurship has to also be protected. So my feeling is the banking needs to step up and work along with the government. Another point that I want to bring in for the banking is the banks have gone through mergers.
Yes, last I think 18 months.
Yes, so they were also devoid of capital at some point of time. They were capitalized, then they went through a merger. So there is a bit of transformation that has happened. So, and they are in the process of transformation. So I hope and presume that the next 3 months all this will settle, because it will be 1 year after the merger. And I think it is going to be a good journey as far as I'm concerned. And this needs to be tightened. I think the government is also cognizant of the fact that the bankers are not doing and are not being aggressive. The finance minister in her many speeches have told and has given confidence to the bankers to go ahead and lend in a very discreet and correct way within the box framework of the Reserve Bank of India. So I think that is a clear thing. So that's the challenge in the banking system, but I think this will be overcome.
So one more, one question for Himanshu, that a reader of ours is asking about, your take on the EV, which you have already explained, but from the EV manufacturing and from the EV, EV cars perspective, how do you look at this union budget? Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Himanshu, so there's a question which actually says is directed to you, which says, how do you look at the EV car perspective in this particular budget. So, do you see EV cars are somewhat been missing out of this out of the core focus, or how do you look at this budget from this perspective?
I'm not, I don't see it fully missing. I wouldn't say that, Fez. I just think that they focused on more on the swapping side, which kind of drives the focus more towards the two-wheelers and three-wheelers. But, you know, the previous budgets that were created, the previous policies that were created, they've kind of made those policies to stand very different from the budgetaries, which is still collectively driving the EV segment anyways. At the same time, yes, I would agree that, you know, they focused more on the infrastructure a little bit more. That would have been more helpful. But I think in overall, I think they're not shy of talking about EV. It's just not, they didn't put it as a priority as high as they put the swapping. But yes, they have concentrated on it, and it still helps quite a bit. And the budget is still pretty high for the consumer and commercial segment. What I also like, Fez, is that, you know, earlier, right before this budget, there were some policies that came out towards semiconductor, which I think is the right footstep forward. You know, the world is today in a major crisis on semiconductors, you know, and India trying to take up that space is a wonderful suggestion, right? And I think, you know, these budgets that are coming in, a lot of that budgets are there for those segments as well. And I think that's where the foreplay was moved to, you know. And I still think that's still part of the EV segment, because the semiconductors are going to be needed for the EVs, and that is where the shortages for challenges are for the EV as well. So I don't say they have totally switched off of it, but I think they have made sure they tackled it in a different format. And as long as you can see that different format, you're going to see that India is still all about EV, and it's still heavily moving towards that direction.
Yes, yes. So now, just to conclude, you know, Mr. Ravi, your rating to this budget out of 10, where 10 is the highest, 1 is the lowest. What is your rating on this year's budget?
An accountant is always very conservative. So I'm being conservative. So conservatively, I will say it's 7.
Okay, okay. And Himanshu, you being you know, very I say, you know, very positive and very positive minded, very optimistic entrepreneur, how do you look at this budget?
To be honest, I couldn't agree more with Mr. Ravi. You know, as the policies are this year, and the budgets are written in a very different format than they would be normally, very blunt. I would say more of the 7.5 to 7, right between 7.5 to 8, between that.
Definitely, because this is also our this thing. Although, you know, I mean, we sometimes you know, try expecting certain immediate and really, you know, spontaneous outcomes and results from this particular, you know, budget document, like Mr. Ravi said, and like you have also mentioned, you know, there are always certain long-term visions and plannings are being considered before getting into the budget draft you know, exercise. And definitely there in this exercise there are certain immediate reforms which are actually expected, you know, usually gets included and considered. So this year budget is also a kind of, you know, a mix of certain long-term things, and also, you know, certain immediate benefits. But I also would definitely like to congratulate each and every single Indian that, you know, we have a you know, system which is still, you know, considering the kind of contemporary issues and the perspectives towards development oriented policies. and we are, inching towards growth. And I hope that this budget and the policy statements gets executed the way, with a slightly aggressive manner, to get the best result out of it. And with this, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining and for giving time to SME Street and decoding budget session. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you.
for inviting Faiz, and it is a pleasure to be part of SME
Thank you,
Street,
sir. Thank you.
and always good to interact with you. And thank you, Himanshu, to have met you, and thanks everyone.
Yes.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Same here. And always, like Faz, like I said earlier, you're always proactive with SMEs, and it's always pleasure to help in any format that we can.
No, thank you so much. We'll stay connected, and we'll have more sessions like this. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Take
All right,
care.
guys.
Thanks.
Okay, sir.